Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard, so whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of dipping a toe into Nurgle's crusty cauldron, then there's something here for you. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, how are we back for episode 1? Or you might also be thinking, didn't you already do this series? And on both accounts, you would be right. So I started this series just before Nephilim hit, and Nephilim has changed an awful lot about what I'd said. So I've decided I'm just going to start over because I'd hope these changes aren't going away anytime soon. So at least this would be a more accurate series as a whole than if I left the other one up with just addendums to edit the changes. Further to that, I made a few mistakes myself, and I want to clear those up just for my own sensibility, but also because I don't want to lead you astray thinking, oh, trust this guy, he's correct. For most of the stuff I had been, but there had been a few mistakes as well, so I want to put those right. So today we're going to just start by taking a look at the basic rules that would apply to a Death Guard army and how you can implement them and get the most out of them. In some cases, you don't even have to do anything. So let's jump in and take a look at the basic rules. So first thing first, there are a few Battleforged specific arrangements that limit the way you can build an army. So if your army's Battleforged, you're subject to the limitations of diseased minions. You cannot have more Death Guard cultists or Poxwalker units than you have Bubonic Astartes core. So Bubonic Astartes core would be your Plague Marines, your Death Shroud, and your Blightlord Terminators. However many squads of them you've got, you can have an equal or fewer squads of Poxwalkers or Cultists. Given the changes to points, you are probably not going to run Cultists for any reason, because Poxwalkers are just superior. And Death Guard Plague Marines now actually have the opportunity to push Poxwalkers out of the list a bit, because you get all that free war gear as an upgrade, if those leaks have not led me astray and they are actually legitimate. Next up, Infernal Jealousy. You can only have a maximum of one Lord of the Death Guard, and you can only have one Demon Prince. So, for example, Typhus is a Lord of the Death Guard, Lord of Contagion, Budget Typhus is a Lord of the Death Guard. You can't have both. But a Malignant Plaguecaster is not a Lord of the Death Guard. So you can have a Demon Prince of Death Guard, a Typhus or Lord of Contagion, and a Malignant Plaguecaster all in the same list, without interfering with that rule, but you can't double down on multiple Lords of the Death Guard. Fetid Virion, so the elite characters that fill up support roles primarily are referred to as Fetid Virion. They have that keyword on the datasheet, so it's pretty easy to spot, and you can include up to 3 of them in a single elite battlefield slot. Given how strong Death Shroud particularly, but also Blightlords to a lesser extent are, you may well intend to fill up all 6 slots in a battalion, 6 elite slots that is, in a battalion. So the fact that you can take 3 Fetid Virion with only 1 slot is very nice for if you did want to go Death Shroud or Blightlord heavy without limiting your ability to take a few selected Fetid Virion units with you. Inexorable Advance. So units with this ability count as remaining stationary as long as they didn't fall back or advance. If the unit has the vehicle keyword, doesn't suffer a penalty to its hit rolls for firing heavy weapons in engagement range of it. Because normally you'd be able to, but there would be a penalty. So this particularly affects things like, say, the Plagueburst Crawler and the Blight Hauler. Plagueburst Crawler cannot fire its blast weapon into melee, but there is a stratagem for that we'll come back to later, so it can technically do that. If the unit has the infantry keyword, it can ignore any modifiers to its move characteristic, advance rolls, and charge rolls. So you can't be limited by, say, Chaos Knights that have if you fail your dread test, you can only charge half as far. No, we're Death Guard, we can come towards you. We don't care. Because we're already slow, to be fair. We don't need our movement halved any further. So that's that for the Battleforged detachment abilities. So next up, let's go on to just the general sort of rules, abilities, and effects that we might see on our Death Guard units. First up, a fan favourite, Disgustingly Resilient. It's back in a new guise as of 9th. It used to perform differently in 8th, but now it is just a flat -1 damage to any incoming damage to a minimum of 1. It affects the vast majority of your army, so you have a blanket -1 damage. Certainly armies like, say, Dark Angels that really like plasma really don't like coming up against Death Guard, but really any Space Marines, to be fair, it doesn't really matter what flavor there are a reasonable number of damage 2 weapons on the list, and they're generally good against any other army, but just not good against Death Guard. You also get those bonus against things like, say, like multi-melters, D6 damage. If they roll a 2, that's going down to 1. If they roll high, it's not necessarily likely to have that big an effect on the one shot, but that 1 damage being knocked off does add up, and it may mean your opponent needs to commit another unit's worth of firing to wipe out one of your units, where they otherwise wouldn't have had to and could have moved on to killing something else. So not something you have to work towards. It's there, -1 damage for most of your stuff. Always great, particularly when most of your models are really tough to begin with. Next up, Plague Weapons. Plague Weapons is a rule there that applies to any Plague Weapon. All of your army pretty much have melee Plague Weapons, though not everything. And there are a good selection of ranged Plague Weapons as well. Any attacks made with those weapons, so can be ranged attacks with the ranged weapons, you would re-roll a wound roll of 1. So, of course, this is something that a lieutenant-style character would bring to an army, and many other armies will include that character because they do that, not necessarily because they add anything else on top. So the fact that Death Guard have that built in is great value. When you're in melee, you don't need to worry about being in a particular area of the board to get your buffs, or, well, I'm out of that area, we're not going to be getting that buff. It's built in because basically all of the army has a melee Plague Weapon. Next up, remorseless. Not as relevant a thing, not going to come up for you all that often, but when it does, it's nice. Remorseless is each time a combat attrition test is taken for the unit, ignore any or all modifiers. So the important thing is, if you had like a +1, you can choose to keep that, but you can ignore your opponent's -2 from Chaos Knights or whatever. So you don't have to ignore everything, you can just ignore the debuffs. But ultimately, combat attrition, when so many models in a unit are destroyed, that may affect how their leadership would react with the morale phase. So it may be that you need to roll a dice, and the total on the dice needs to add with however many models were lost, and that needs to be equal or lower to the leadership of that unit. So a squad of 10 Plague Marines has leadership 8 because the sergeant is there. Let's say 5 died. 8 minus 5 is 3. So if I roll a 3 or less, they're fine. If I roll a 4, 5, 6, they fail morale. I would lose 1 model as a result. We would then roll a dice for each remaining unit, and any 1s, they would flee as well. So things like Chaos Knights want to put you on failing on 1 and 2s, or failing on potentially 1, 2s, and 3s towards the end of the game, I believe. So at the end of the day, being able to ignore that means you're going to keep units together for longer, but you don't necessarily always build an army in a way that it can be affected by that. 5-man squads are more resistant to it, just because if you've done enough damage to make them fail morale, you've probably basically killed them all anyway, and they're no longer a viable unit either way. Obviously, you would want to keep them on the table if you can, but if they go, it's not the biggest loss. And then lastly there, we've got malicious volleys. So instead of following the normal rapid-fire weapon rules for models shooting rapid-fire bolt weapons, which are now the worst weapon, well, they always were the worst weapon to take, but you've got no reason to take them on your Plague Marines anymore because you can upgrade them to anything for free, allegedly. But the shooting model, if the shooting model is infantry and remains stationary, it can double tap. Of course, with the inexorable advance, they would always count as standing still, so Marines can double tap with bolters, but I would just take a plasma gun instead if you want a rapid-fire 24-inch weapon. More strength, more AP, don't necessarily need to overcharge it. It also counts for your Terminators just innately by them being Terminators, and that's generally the case across all Space Marines. Your Space Marines, your Blight Lord Terminators could take combi bolters just to be cheap. So at least you might get some use out of it there, but you're never really expecting bolters to carry the army here. That's just not what Death Guard are about. And one other one here that isn't on the codex that I didn't mention last time was Armor of Contempt. So Armor of Contempt applies to all the models in the codex that have the Heretic Astartes keyword. And that isn't limited just to Astartes models. So a Plague Marine you would fully expect to be an Astartes because they are. But a Blight Hauler isn't an Astartes shape. It doesn't come from being an Astartes for the most part, to my knowledge, although they're made by Astartes in a lot of cases. So with that being said, you wouldn't necessarily expect them to get Armor of Contempt, but they do. It's anything that has any sort of powered armor on it, and you'll see this across many other factions as well. Chaos Space Marines, Thousand Suns, all the Astartes, Sisters of Battle, but not every unit that they've got. So it's something that will come up a lot, and all it does is reduce the armor penetration of an attack made against your model by 1. If it's AP2, it goes down to AP1, whatever it might be. If it's AP0, it has no effect. It doesn't improve your armor save, it reduces the AP, which has that effect, but it's not the same rule. So it's important to be aware of that distinction. One thing to note is that there is a Warlord trait that relates to the AP of the attack. As far as I'm concerned, if the attack is 2 AP and then is reduced to 1, the attack is considered 2 AP as far as rules are concerned, even though the actual effect it had was at AP -1. So I will come back to that point, but that's the way I read that. It doesn't change the profile you're being shot with. It changes the effect it has on you. So it's AP3, fine, that's an AP3 attack, but I'm only taking AP2 because of Armor of Contempt. Hopefully that makes sense, but it should make more when we come back to the Relics and Warlord traits again. And then the very last one here, in fact, there's two. I'll quickly touch on Teleport Strike. Teleport Strike allows Terminators to come in from reserves from the second turn onwards, no closer than 9 inches to an opposing model or enemy deployment zone, but that isn't going to be the case because it's already at least turn 2. So you've just got to be at least 9 inches away from enemy models. Now, with that being the case, it is more than 9. So 9-inch range will be relevant as far as the next rule. You are 9.000001 inch away. So it is a 9-inch charge, but a 9-inch aura is not hitting that model because it is infinitesimally smaller than 9 inches away. So just bear that in mind when it comes to the next rule, which is the big boy, the one that does the most legwork probably besides Disgustingly Resilient, is the Contagions of Nurgle. This is what set Death Guard apart and what earned them the nerf from the previous Balanced Data Slate, and probably why we're seeing it be reversed is that now everybody else has caught up. This isn't quite as devastating, but it certainly was at the beginning of 9th. So Contagion, by default, is a -1 toughness area of effect. Now, I'm specifically not using the term aura, which is a term you'll see in many datasheets, many rules from many codexes, because they are explicitly different to an aura. There are rules that will, for example, turn off an aura. That would turn off a Chapter Master's reroll aura, but it will not shut off a contagion of Nurgle, because as good as you are at stopping my commander giving orders, you can't stop him being stinky. He is stinky. So it's not an aura, not affected by things that shut auras down, and truth be told, there's no way your opponent can affect this. This is yours to play with, so enjoy it. So it's an area of ability around the affected models, which is for the most part any model in the list. There are a few that don't have it, but the majority do. And it's an area around them of a certain number of inches, like an aura. And its effect by default is just -1 toughness, which is phenomenal. Now, there are ways to upgrade that with Warlord Contagion traits, but that we will touch on in another video. Just for now, consider that the majority of the units you'll bring, if not all, will have that -1 toughness radius around them. On turn 1, and I will put this up on the screen here for you, on turn 1, the Contagion range is 1 inch, so that's not hitting a lot unless you're in melee with them. And you're not that likely to be in melee with them turn 1, so you're not getting much out of it there. Turn 2, it's 3 inches. Turn 3, it's 6 inches, and turn 4, it's 9 inches. So, of course, as we get to the later stages, it becomes easier and easier to affect more of the opponent's army. And, of course, toughness is a crucial factor in the wound roll. Being able to manipulate your opponent's toughness down by 1 affects so many breakpoints, allowing you to wound on 3s when it would have otherwise been 4s, 2s when it had otherwise been 3s. Either way around, it's a great benefit to have because you're more likely to push through that wound roll. And especially given the fact that you might also be using a plague weapon, you may have that additional built-in consistency of being able to re-roll the 1s as well. A couple of other side notes on that, which I'll touch on with the individual models as well. There are a few ways this can be augmented just by individual models. First up, Big Mortarion, the Primarch of the Death Guard, he has a constant 9-inch aura. So he doesn't care what turn it is. He's always got a 9-inch aura, which is great. Typhus, he has a 3-inch extension to his aura, as would the Lord of Contagion. So whatever it should be, he has 3 inches more. And the Death Shroud can take an item that would do the same for them. It would extend their aura by 3 inches. You don't have to include that on them as war gear, but you can. And again, there's no bad reason to extend the aura. It's going to make it that bit easier to get more enemy units in range, and then you may have the pick of what you want to target to abuse their reduced toughness. Well, that is the basic rules. Hope you're enjoying the series, and hope you did with the previous one, to be fair. But while this one goes up, I will then make that one private, just because, as I say, the information is out of date now, and I got a couple of things wrong, which I'm not happy with. So thank you to everybody that did get involved on the previous series. Just because I'm putting it to private doesn't mean that none of that mattered to me. It really, really did. If you want to get involved in this one, it would really mean a lot to me. I'd be particularly interested in your opinion if you think I've improved the way I've delivered it, because I like to do these things on the fly, pretty much. And of course, repetitions help with that. Obviously, I could sit here and just sort of read a script from a book or a notepad, but I personally prefer to do it on the fly, and hopefully you appreciate that as well. But I'd love to know what you think on that. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.